with much of the same type of things you see on Earth. In fact, what is the dictionary? It probably has that here. Ah, here it is. It's a sort of a decadent, kicked-in-the-head civilization that contains automobiles, business suits, fedora hats, telephones, spaceships, a civilization which looks almost exactly like a duplicate, but is worse off than the current U.S. civilization. It's right here.
Let me ask you this. Since your time track differs from what is in that book.
Right. Only the dates are wrong.
How did you come upon your time track? Through the e-meter?
No, through the auditor, through my auditing.
Okay, but did he use the e-meter?
Yeah.
So it was the e-meter that was verifying the time?
Yeah, we went through different interactive cycles where Christ was a part of destroying civilizations that I had lived on. That was the essence of the search.
Did Christ keep coming up in your time track?
No, not at all. He came up once before this time. And that occurred at the very beginning when it's my whole write-up on... This is actually a KR, a knowledge report, this book. And in my chapters of the Holy Book of Life called Creation and Illusion, the first experience I had with Jesus Christ, who suppressed us and trapped us in our physical bodies, is all outlined in the book. All of this data, by the way, in the book, is based on auditing cycles.
Through the e-meter.
Through the e-meter, except I didn't say that in the book because I didn't want people to know that it came from Scientology.
Why?
Because I want them to get the data at the appropriate time. Once they see this book and they know the data, eventually I will come forward and tell them that show them with the meter. For example, when people talk to me later on, after the book is well accepted, I'll bring my meter on television and I'll show them exactly that I was his father.
So all the content of what's in that book are realizations that you had...
Cognitions. Let's use the right terminology.
Sorry. Are cognitions that you had during auditing.
Exactly.
How would you... Can you just describe the process whereby you would arrive at a cognition? Pick one out of there, or just or do a hypothetical, and just describe the process whereby you would come to a cognition and come to recognize the truth of a cognition.
Well, there's many ways to do that. One, of course, is to do the formulas outlined in self-analysis. Here's an easy way. You come up with all the perceptics connected with the mental image picture. And the auditor will ask you, well, what did it smell like on that day? What was it raining? Who was around you? What voices did you hear? And eventually you synthesize everything to do with the mental image picture. You don't just have a visio. You have a visio which is more real than you're sitting in front of the auditor.
But how, for example, would you start out a session, and would the session progress back to the point at which...
Well, the first part of a session is seeing if there's any present time problems,
right,
doing your rudiments, you know.
Right.
And
so you'd be asked if there are any present time problems, there'd be no read on the meter, and you could go on.
Right.
Right. Then what would happen next?
We would establish goals for the session.
Okay. How would that occur?
Well, the auditor would ask me, what do you wish to accomplish in this session?
And then give me an example of what you might say.
Well, I would say, here's an example. I'd like to find out why I didn't like milk.
Okay, and then what would happen next?
And then we would discuss, the auditor would direct me to view certain incidents in my lifetime regarding somatics on milk.
Okay, so you
we would go to the earliest incident.
All right.
We'd run it like an engram.
Right.
You know.
Okay, so you run it back through this life.
Yeah.
And then would you just go past lives on it?
Yeah.
And...
Because, for example, on milk, my mother once drank milk while she was carrying me. And I vomited in her stomach. I vomited. And I went through the incident vomiting in her stomach.
Well, how did that come to pass?
Okay, let's say you get that cognition and you've got a charge on it on the meter.
Right, I actually vomited again. I was vomiting there. But I was not there. I was in my mother's stomach.
Okay. How would the charge on that cognition be reduced?
I'd have to keep reviewing the incident and re-stimulating it.
Until until you no longer got to read on
until
the
I no longer had to read, and then we would go to an earlier incident.
And so you would just keep looking for an earlier incident until one occurred.
Yeah.
And then you would
It's
describe
like doing
that,
fish and fumble.
and then you would describe that incident fully.
Right.
And then you keep reviewing the incident until the charge
Go to the
disappeared.
earliest incident on the track that you could find where there's any charge. And then what we would do is we would do a check. I would go to a past life where I loved milk. See?
Mm-hmm.
And that was like a control in scientific terminology. Where I would find a lifetime prior to that where I loved milk. You know. And I would be drinking milk, wasting milk, feeding milk to babies, you know, all the different things you can do with milk. Even a milk enema, you know. And I found that, well, at that time I was fine, you know. That was after the milk issue had been destimulated. So we wanted to make sure it wasn't from an earlier incident. You follow?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it works. And whole track incidents are run the same way. For example, take for example this one. 955 quadrillion years ago,
Mm-hmm.
where I smashed a bubble of light. It was a crime. It was an overt act. Because that light was a source of theta. It was a source of pleasure, shall I say in English, for other thetans. And I deliberately smashed a bubble of light and inhibited theta by creating n theta.
This is what I'm trying to understand. How did you come to that realization? You're sitting there. What caused that thought to come?
That thought came from a lifetime where I was blind. And the way I found this incident is to go back to the first time that I had any overts on light. This is how the processes work.